I love helping people recognize that M&A does not need to be this big, scary thing that only the big guys get to do. It's a really, really valid strategy for everyone.
Welcome to the Deep Specialization Podcast, the show where we blend focus, strategy, and client intimacy in order to scale and simplify our businesses and our lives. I'm your host, Quinn. Let's jump into the show. Today, I'm joined by the head of mergers and acquisitions of Herringbone Digital. He's a friend, a previous colleague from Scorpion. His name is Azim Nagree. Welcome, Azim.
Corey, so good to be here. Really excited to have a great conversation today. Very grateful for the opportunity to be here. Love what you do. Love how you're helping agency owners and can't wait to share some of my knowledge.
Beautiful. Well, I'm equally or maybe even more excited than you. Just really great to have you here and share all this wisdom that you bring to the audience and to me too. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's start with your time at Scorpion. So we met at Scorpion, I think it was 2021?
To the end of 2020, yes.
2020, 2021.
You're one of the people that interviewed me before I got that job. And so
that's right.
Obviously, I passed the sniff test, which is great.
Well done. So tell the audience, for those who may not know, like what was happening at Scorpion that made sense for them to invest in a professional who knows M&A for Scorpion and their growth trajectory?
Yeah, look, great question, Corey. So back 2020, things were changing at Scorpion, as some of you sort of might know or realize. But one of the things that they had focused on was not only continuing the organic growth, just acquiring customers through their sales and marketing efforts, but also looking to acquire other agencies to bring them into the Scorpion fold. You know, the thought process there was that there were some really great agency owners who might be looking for an exit or might be looking to sort of end their time as being an agency owner. And Scorpion was going to be a great home for them because of the size, the technology, and the resources. So my role for my time there at Scorpion was to really go and find agency owners who might be interested in selling and then help sort of navigate through that process.
So what was happening at Scorpion at that time? And really what I'm looking for is, when thinking about if I was an agency owner listening to this right now, what would be an indication that it's time for me to start maybe doing some M&A to help me to accelerate growth like Scorpion was? Like what is the right time to do that?
Yeah, always is the right time.
Good answer.
No, look, there's a theme that I'll touch upon in many of the questions that I've no doubt that you're going to ask me, Corey. And that theme is why? Like, why do you want to do M&A? And I think one of the biggest reasons that companies succeed or fail in doing M&A is because they answer that question correctly or incorrectly. So some reasons why you might want to do M&A. It could be because you're trying to achieve scale and you want to bring on more customers onto your platform to help you achieve economies of scale. Or it might be that you want to add a brand new service offering and you do that by acquisition rather than trying to build it yourself. Or you might want to reach out into a new geography and rather than set up in a whole new region, you end up buying a company. And so if you're an agency owner thinking about it might be time to buy, I really challenge you to think very thoughtfully around why do you want to do it? Look, M&A is cool. You're talking to a guy who loves M&A. And so I know that it might sound really cool to say, oh my gosh, I'm so big now that I'm going to acquire another company. But I challenge every agency owner who is thinking about that to understand the why, because that will impact every step of the process. It will impact who you talk to. It will impact deal structure. It will impact valuation. It will impact integration planning. Everything stems from that why.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the agency founders that I've met, I wouldn't say all of them, but quite a few get this shiny object syndrome where maybe the next greatest thing, because someone else mentioned it somewhere, is M&A, but that may not truly be, from an objective perspective, it may just be truly a distraction. How does an agency owner know that they're prepared to go through the process of successfully acquiring another company?
Yeah, great question. I actually wrote the words "shiny new object" in my notes, so you touched on it perfectly. No, you're right. Again, it sounds cool, but I think one of the things that agency owners need to recognize is that going through an acquisition process or selling, but especially an acquisition, and the working with the integration afterwards, it's a lot of work. It's not something that you just sort of kind of do. Well, I'll just go and buy a company. It'll be great, and we'll just tuck it in. It's fantastic. So, one of the most important things I think that agency owners who are thinking about going through that process is, in addition to realizing the why, they need to sort of really figure out, okay, how is this going to get done? There are only so many hours in the day.
Right.
If I'm now needing to spend 4 or 5 or 6 hours per day on the acquisition, who's picking up the work that I would normally otherwise do?
Right.
So having that really strong management team in place, the ability to delegate, or perhaps like Scorpion, you go and hire an M&A professional to do that for you. But there's extra work and someone has to do that work.
So let's say you were going to build out maybe an M&A function. You feel strongly that this is going to be a strategic way to grow, whether that's through new service lines or new geographies. What is a way that an agency founder could approach building out this function in their agency?
Yeah, it's also a great question. Look, there's the obvious path of going and hiring an M&A professionals. Someone like myself has done it for many, many years, finding those folks in investment banking or consulting or private equity. Those are definitely the obvious choice. The reality, though, is you don't need someone with deep, deep, deep M&A experience. You need someone who is smart and driven and can figure this stuff out. Buying an agency, and I might be putting myself out of a job here, Corey, but buying an agency, it's not rocket science. If you're smart, you can sort of figure it out. It's more around knowing who to talk to, having the networks, figuring out how it's going to fit into your organization, and then dedicating the time to do it. That's what's going to make it successful.
Yeah. Let's say an agency was considering going through their first acquisition. What's maybe some financing options they can consider when they find a target agency that they really like? Like, how are they going to finance this?
Yeah, look, there's lots of different options, and I would definitely suggest, I'm not going to give you the entirety of the list, but just off the top of your head, the obvious one, cash reserves. Obviously, if the agency is doing very, very well for itself and has got cash reserves built up, and perhaps the company you're looking to acquire or the agency you're looking to acquire is small, you might be able to just pay straight cash. Great. There's traditional bank financing, so going to a bank, going through the normal process. My experience is that banks are either very, very supportive of lending money to go and buy a business, and there are also banks who are very unsupportive of buying. So you might need to shop around to find a bank who sort of understands you, the business, the space. Obviously, there's SBA financing out there, a little bit easier to get in the sense they're going to back you a little bit more, but obviously the hurdles are much higher and the interest rates are a little bit higher for those types of acquisitions. You can also looking at raising your own money. So maybe you do a friends and family round where everyone chips in, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to be able to raise a cash. So, and then the last piece, which I think oftentimes people forget, is that hopefully the reason you're buying this agency is because it's going to generate a return on your investment. So that in itself could potentially start helping you pay down the debt or paying down the investments after the acquisition is complete.
Are you a fan of seller financing?
Yeah, in the right circumstances, in the right terms, it's absolutely something that should be an option to be considered. I mean, if the seller's willing to finance it, take advantage of it. And if it's at terms that make sense. I mean, out of everyone who knows the business and is going to be most understanding of the risk and opportunity, it's going to be the seller. So if that's an option, it's a very, very good one.
And when, again, considering someone maybe as their first acquisition, you want to go down this road, not really coming from a finance background, what would be the approach that would maybe be the least risky or the most straightforward to help them get through the transaction without getting caught up in nonsense?
Yeah. So I think there are two things. So number one, being very clear about what you're trying to get out of that transaction. Back to the why.
Yeah.
Are you doing it you for the right reasons? Are you not? The second one would be to try and stay within the sphere of your current expertise. You know, if you're doing, for example, digital marketing, and you know the digital marketing world really, really well, maybe for your first M&A, you try and stay close to digital marketing. You add on another agency that's focused on digital marketing versus perhaps going into print.
Yeah.
Try and stay pretty close to home is always a good strategy. And then the third one would be just leverage your network for experts in that. Get their
Yeah.
advice, get their guidance. Everyone's going to have an opinion on M&A, so talking to folks is a great way to get up the learning curve.
Let's talk about the other side of the transaction. The agency that maybe have built them up to a place where you have a founder who's looking for some kind of exit, a partial
Yep.
exit, full exit, something like that. You have been, as I understand it, involved in a couple of exits as sort of as an acquiree versus the
Yes.
acquirer, right? That's RX Wiki, Spiceworks, a couple
Yep.
others, right?
Yep.
Any key insights? What it's like to go through, be acquired, and go through that experience?
Yeah, it can be daunting. It can be exciting and daunting. And I would probably answer that question in thinking through a couple of different constituent groups.
Okay.
So, if you're the actual owner who's selling, that's sort of one perspective. You also have the perspective of your employees. Chances are pretty much every agency owner I speak to love their team, cherish their team. And so you need to sort of think about things from their perspective. And then the clients as well. You obviously, many agency owners I've spoken to, they've got deep relationships with their clients. And so understanding what the transaction looks like for all
Yeah.
three of those constituent groups is critically important. For you as the owner, obviously it's very uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen, but you're privy to a lot of the conversations those other two groups may not be privy to. So your level of understanding is quite high. And obviously there hopefully is a good financial outcome for you as well. When you start thinking about employees, that's a tough one because those employees are very, very scared about what's happening. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions that you may not have the answer to. So being prepared to have those conversations. And then for clients as well, same thing. They chose you for a reason, and now they're being told that you don't necessarily have a role to play going forward. So being able to help explain to them why this acquisition makes sense for them is also very important.
So you at Scorpion, I know that I imagine you spoke with a lot of agencies that
Yes,
were
a lot.
potentially thinking about becoming acquired by Scorpion. Some
Yeah.
maybe accepted those offers and that transaction went through. How would you coach those businesses as it relates to talking to their employees? Like, what are some of the things that the owners who you're dealing with directly, how do
Yeah.
they sort of help reduce the level of anxiety or the nervousness or the tension within the employee pool?
Yeah, it's a great question, Corey. And we sort of deal with this in my current role at Herringbone as well, sort of going through that process with the company right now. Look, I think it's not easy. There's no silver bullet. There's no exact right way of doing it. I'm pretty sure every management consulting firm out there and every Harvard Business Case review will tell you one way of doing it. But the reality is that at the end of the day, it's people. And it's people, and these are the people that you care about. So
Yeah.
the approach I try and take, either doing it with myself or coaching the companies who are selling, is being as open and as transparent as you possibly can
Yeah.
at the right stage of the transaction. When you're early in conversations, you're not going to tell every frontline employee, but hey, we're thinking about selling. That's just going to cause a level of anxiety that it is not necessary. As you start to get further on the transaction, obviously your circle of trust starts to increase, ultimately to the point where you're post close and you need to tell everyone. Just openness, transparency, honesty, I think goes a long way.
Yeah.
Even when you don't have the answers to the questions that are being asked,
Yeah.
I think you can rely upon that level of trust that you've hopefully built with your employees over the years.
Yeah. What about clients? Is there any specific recommendations or advice you have for agencies that are potentially going through or currently going through being acquired? What can they do to help ensure that their clients don't just pack their bags and take
Yeah.
off?
Yeah. Again, I've seen that done well. I've seen that done poorly.
Yeah.
Again, I think the key there, and we can sort of talk about one of the specific tactics, the key there is to really understand what does this mean for the client at the end of the day. And hopefully, not necessarily happens in every case, but hopefully there is going to be some upside for the
Yeah.
client,
Yeah.
whether it be access to new technology or new services or a bigger and more scalable platform. But being very, very clear and explain to the client what's going to change and what's not going to change is really important. So one of the things that, I think you sort of said we should discuss is, okay, how do you do that? I almost advocate going through and building like a mini comms plan for every single client. Who's going to
One-to-one.
contact them? When are they going to get contacted? How are they going to get contacted? And what's the kind of pitch for that client that's going to resonate the most for them?
Right. Right. It
It
really
can be
is a sales pitch. You have to sell them on the future, right? This
yeah,
new brighter
exactly.
future. Yeah.
And again, hopefully, you're doing this in whole or at least in part because it's going to be a good outcome for your
Sure.
client. So
Of course.
hopefully it's not a huge sales pitch that you have to
Right.
really,
Yeah. But
really
you have to
convince
be
them.
able to communicate it clearly and persuasively so that they can see it versus them hearing about the news and worrying about like, what does this mean to me? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's to your point. I mean, the clients chose to work with you as an agency for a reason. They just want to know, what does this mean? What's
Right.
going to change and what's
Yeah.
not going to change? And they want to hear it from you versus anyone else.
Reminds me of the old saying, everyone's listening to the old radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me?
There you go. I love it. I've not heard that one. I might use it, but no, that's exactly it.
Yeah. So you mentioned it briefly. So you've seen it worked well and you've seen it work poorly. So when has it not worked out well? Maybe you could give us an example of a time it
Yeah.
didn't.
Look, I think
Actually work well.
when it doesn't work well is when you don't do that. When you
Yeah.
don't get to control the
But are there any
narrative.
particular examples of when this didn't go well that you can
Yeah.
share with us?
There was one example in a previous life where
Yeah.
the news leaked.
Yeah.
And of course, it meant that that we were not able to have that. We weren't able to control the narrative for that client or for the clients, and so we weren't able to go out to them per our schedule. Bob couldn't do the phone call on Tuesday to
Right.
talk about X
Right.
because Bob had heard about it from somebody
Right.
else on social
He's
media
already
on
pissed
Monday.
off. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's calling you like, "What the hell?" I thought we had a relationship. Now you've sold to this person. It can
Yeah.
be challenging, obviously. So,
Sure.
keeping things within control is really important.
Let's talk about this idea of fit. Like
Yeah.
you've seen a lot of acquisitions go through, and I'm sure at varying levels there've been good ones and better ones than others. But what are some things that an agency that's looking to be acquired should be screening for as it relates to fit to ensure a successful marriage down the road?
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to get tired of me saying this, Corey, but it's the why.
Why?
It's the why exactly. So
Yeah,
let's use a tangible example. Okay.
please.
So let's think about if you're an agency owner and you are really, really strong in SEO and you see an opportunity to add paid into your mix. And so clearly what you want to be doing is you want to be evaluating any agency that you're looking to buy through the lens of their paid program. What is it? How do they work it? How do they charge
Yeah,
for it? Does it work? And then more importantly, you're trying to figure out, okay, if I were to offer this service to my clients, is it something they're going to be wanting to buy?
yeah,
So being very thoughtful around the why, same thing for geography, same thing for, I'm doing this because I just want to add profitability.
sure,
If that's what your motivation is, well, you want to be making sure that you're doing very, very thorough investigation of the financial statements to make sure that profitability is actually there.
sure. But
So
and then
really understand that
yeah,
criteria is important.
and then on the acquiree side, looking to be acquired, you obviously agency founder built up a business to the point where it is an asset that others are attracted to buy. How do you avoid? I'm looking for like the fit, not just the business sense, but how do you avoid a situation where maybe you get acquired by this company and you realize after the acquisition that they're really not a good fit? Like
Yeah.
what can you do to minimize the risk of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's how do you make sure you end up staying married?
Yes.
You
Yes.
look,
You don't have you don't have seller's remorse, maybe.
exactly. So there's a couple of things. Obviously, you'd want to do your own due diligence on them, and that can be done in
Yeah.
person. both in a professional context during meetings as well as a social context where you're having the obligatory steak dinner and red wine to really understand who they are. I think that's sort of one aspect of it. The other part would be just doing due diligence with other folks who might know them. So,
Okay.
talk to other companies that they may have acquired. Ask to talk to some of their key employees once they're willing to open up their circle a little bit about who you can talk to. We also like to do due diligence on customers. And so, obviously it has to be managed very, very well and very closely, but as a seller, talking to some of the buyer's customers is a great way to sort of get insight around the buyer and whether they're doing good work or not. So lots of diligence and across different constituents is a great way to get a sense of who the buyer is.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about the work you're doing now at Herringbone.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. Look, within the local space, so businesses that serve their local communities, lawyers, doctors, dentists, those sort of folks, anyone who works with those agencies, anyone who works with those businesses knows it's really hard to run that business. You're so good at being a technician of your craft. You're a really good doctor or a dentist or lawyer. Many of them are not great business operators. And so we've always had this notion of, wouldn't it be great if we could just help them run their business better? And that's what Herringbone's trying to do. We're creating, through acquisition, the opportunity to buy a range of products and services to help that business owner run their business better. We're starting off with agencies, digital agencies specifically, because we know the problem endemic to most of these businesses is growth. So we want to start with growth, but over the course of our journey, we fully expect to be able to add in other services. So as a business owner, you know that the business side is being taken care of, so you can focus on your craft. So we've been at it for a relatively short period of time, but we're having a tremendous amount of success and a tremendous amount of fun doing it as well.
That's awesome. So I think back in my business school days, like a business process outsourcing company, like what you'd see in the dental space, the DSO, right? There where you're coming in and helping them to freeing them up from the aspects of the business that they don't care about, as you said, and letting them be doctors or lawyers or manufacturers, whatever that is.
Yeah. And so for the moment, we're focused on just the working with lawyers, the dentists, and then elective medical providers. So think about plastic surgery, dermatology, ophthalmology, those types of folks, because we want to stay very focused. We want to be very vertically specialized, which might resonate with you, Corey.
Yes.
We do not want to be broad.
Why is that important, Azim? Tell me why that's important.
I teed it up for you. Yeah, so we look, it's one of those things that in our world, as acquiring these agencies, as well as in the agency world, specialization allows you to dominate and therefore win. Yeah. It's too hard, as you know, and as you preach, it's too hard to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
You have to have a level of expertise within a vertical.
I wrote a book about that.
I'm preaching, man. I'm preaching you. But that's it. That's it. You can't be everything to everyone. So we're very, very focused on just those three verticals.
Yeah.
We're going deep. So again, starting with digital marketing, but we're going to add on coaching or virtual assistants or front or intake or whatever else is needed.
So good. So needed.
And you have to be able to.
So needed, Zim. It is. Like what you're doing is like.
So in order to go deep, you've got to go narrow.
Yeah. And I love this because a lot of agencies that I know who maybe, let's say, working with attorneys, their job is to drive high quality leads and interest into the law firm. They're doing their job, but they're losing clients at the same time because the law firms just don't understand the business of intake, right? It's a very natural thing for an agency to want them to do. Yeah. And, but struggle because they're dependent on the attorneys, in this case, the law firm's ability to take in these great leads as the agency is fulfilling their part of the deal, right? And so I love that you're looking at it from that perspective. It's powerful.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're really seeing, Corey, is just thinking about how AI changes this completely.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I talk to a lot of agency owners who, when I ask them about their use of AI, like, we're using it for creating blogs. And you're like, that's not AI, that's ChatGPT. And by the way, that's not such a great use of it anyway. But,
Right. Right.
and then you talk to other agency owners who are starting to use AI not only to streamline their workflows and processes, but they're starting to use it to help with things like intake. And I firmly believe that over the course of the next 12 months, you'll see agencies, those who don't get it are going to really, really struggle. And those who do get it, I often get asked, how much should I be investing in AI? And my answer is, whatever you're spending, it's not enough.
Right.
Candidly. And so I'm going down a little bit of a rat hole here on AI.
No,
But
it's relevant. I mean,
important.
it's a hot topic for the audience because, to your point, it is a place that's really innovating, that's directly impacting their business. And yes, there will be some competitors who go hardcore on AI, and they're going to have an advantage in the marketplace and be able to potentially provide a better product for less cost because they're streamlined and they're using more software than people.
And so to sort of bring it back to the topic,
Yeah.
There are quite a few sellers or agency owners who are thinking about selling because they see the AI tsunami coming.
Yeah.
And they don't have the
They're not up for
ability,
it.
the expertise, and kudos to them. Like that's a really, really good insight for them to have. Saying, you know what, I can't do this by myself. Why don't I go and partner with someone like Herringbone who can help me get over this wave? So definitely something to be thinking about.
So let's talk about one of the vertical markets you guys are focusing on. You mentioned our lawyers, and this could be true for any agency, whether it's Herringbone or others who are being acquisitive, meaning they're in the market looking for opportunities to buy great agencies. What do you want as an acquirer in an ideal agency targeting attorneys? Like, what would be a perfect fit?
Yeah, look, I think it obviously depends upon who the acquirer is. In our specific instance, we have very defined criteria around size, around growth, around retention, around service areas. They need to be sort of, $1 million of profitability plus minus. They need to have a good set of product offerings. But in general, some of the things that I would encourage agency owners who are looking to sell to think about is, make sure you've got a clean set of books. Like us.
What does
or
that mean
anybody.
specifically? I get that, but what do you mean specifically? Does that mean that you have your assistant look at them every couple of weeks, or what does that mean exactly?
So I think number one, having a set of books. You'd be surprised the number of agency owners who don't have a set of books, but have a set of books that really clearly explain what your income statement is or your profitability over the last. Most buyers, including us, will ask for at least 2 to 3 years worth of financials. That's sort of step number one, getting those sets of books. Number two, for many agency owners, inevitably there are going to be sort of one-off transactions. There's going to be some personal expenses that are being run through the business. Don't tell the IRS, but that's the reality of life.
That's what happens.
So being able to identify those very clearly is really, really important. And then the third thing is to have a really good explanation around any anomalies that might come. This year's growth was flat because of X, or this really large client left because of Y. Buyers are going to ask questions around the anomalies. It's so much better to have those answers ready to go so you can tell them and provide a level of confidence that you understand your business versus not.
Are there certain ratios that you like to see in place as it relates to revenue, profit, anything come to mind?
Not really, because I think there are different buyers who've got different criteria.
Yeah.
So there are some buyers who will look at a business and say, well, we want to buy that business, and then we just want it to stand alone on the side. That clearly needs to have one type of financial profile. There are other buyers that might come along and say, well, we don't really care about the financial profile because we're going to impose our platform, our systems, our mechanics on there. So it's kind of irrelevant what the business is doing today. More of a kind of a fixer-upper. So it sort of goes back to the diligence of what you're looking for in terms of a buyer.
Let's say you want to be acquired. How do you put the signal in the market that you're looking for suitors?
Yeah,
besides waiting for a cold call from you.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, so one of the things that I definitely encourage, and I wrote a
Yeah.
LinkedIn post about this,
Yeah.
Corey, is if you're starting to be in the market, take those calls. Like, I know they can be time consuming, and I know that you're going to have a bunch of tire kickers, but
Yeah.
take those calls because you're going to learn a lot
Yeah.
about how they're viewing you as a business. It will help inform you about what you might need to fix or what you can improve upon. It will help inform you about valuation. So take those calls, even if it's not a serious, even if you're not serious about selling, taking those calls is helpful. When you get to the next stage, where you're now moving from being a passive seller to an active seller, engaging with a broker slash banker is probably a worthwhile step. I will definitely say there are some brokers and bankers who are better than others. So do your diligence on those. I think probably the best way to do that would be to ask for references from
Yeah.
previous agencies that they have repped, because having a bad broker or a bad banker can be the difference between a good transaction and a bad transaction. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I've worked with many bankers and brokers who are just not very good.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. I did talk to someone not too long ago who went through the process of being sold. They ultimately, the transaction didn't go through.
Yeah,
And it was really painful. And they said it was the best thing they could have done for their business because they realized they had all of these gaps as it
yeah,
relates to the business asset, as it were, like the books and the
yeah,
profitability and measuring just sort of the fundamentals of the business. They didn't have any of that in place.
yeah.
And as a result of going through that process, they understood now the value of that and has made them a much stronger business, even though they didn't end up selling.
Yeah, it's a very strange analogy, which I just made up on the spot, but it's almost
Yeah.
like training for a marathon. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter whether you run the race or not,
Yeah.
but it's the 6 month training regime
Yes.
leading up to it
Yeah. That's
that
where the
makes
work
you a
is.
better, stronger human being at the end of it. It's very
Absolutely.
good. So same type of hygiene.
So we talked about this briefly, but I wanted to just make sure I had an opportunity to ask you this. How does specialization in an agency, like an agency is specialized, let's call it in a vertical or in a service like SEO, how does that impact a purchase decision?
Yeah, look, it's a really important part of it, Corey. So general, like I described before, agencies that are focused in a vertical tend to be in a better position to dominate in that vertical and win in that vertical.
Yeah.
And so as a result, two things will happen. Number one is that you might decrease the number of buyers that are going to be interested in your firm, but that interest level is going to be so much, much higher. And when I say decrease number, because you only care about the agencies who understand your vertical. They
Right.
understand who you are. And so they're going to be a much more serious buyer. So that's number one. Number two is they're going to pay more. And it's as simple as that. Company agencies that are vertically specialized will command a premium compared to those who don't. All other things being equal, of course.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
And so to put this in sort of tangible terms, you will see, so typical valuation methodology for an agency, it varies a lot, but a good rough rule of thumb is you can use a multiple of your EBITDA or your seller's discretionary earnings, SDE. A non-vertical agency will probably trade 2 to 3 to 4 times that EBITDA. If you are a specialized firm, you'll tend to get anywhere between 1 to 2 to 3x on top of that.
Yeah.
So it can make a
Amazing.
big difference in terms of valuation, as well as the attractiveness of you to a potential buyer.
Awesome. What else should we cover about M&A? You're so deeply entrenched in this topic. What are the things, what maybe some things we didn't cover that would be helpful, do you think?
Yeah, I think yes. I was going to talk about valuation, but I end up talking about valuation anyway because that's the question that everyone wants to know. But to dig into valuation just a little bit more, there are those ballpark ranges I gave. I think a lot will depend upon the circumstances. So as you're thinking about buying an agency or selling an agency, those are some ballparks. If you want sort of more specific advice, feel free to reach out to me, and I know we'll share my contact information shortly.
Yep.
But happy to sort of give guidance around that. The second thing that I definitely encourage agency owners to think through is acquisitions, especially if you're looking to buy, it's not just for the big guys. Like, yes, it makes headlines on Wall Street Journal and you hear all these, multi-billion-dollar transactions being done by hedge funds and investment bankers. The vast majority of volume of transactions are done in the smaller agencies. And so just because if you think that, wow, I'm only a 6-figure or maybe a 7-figure agency, there's no way I could possibly think about buying or selling my agency. I challenge you to think about that, because I don't think that's accurate. I think you can be a seller and or an acquirer, even at those lower levels.
Sure.
Now, obviously, everything gets dialed back a little bit, but that's a path that's open to you.
How small is too small, though?
Look, I mean, if you're sort of at the 5-figure range in terms of revenue, there are probably things that you should be more focused on, which is growing organically and building the engine and creating a sales and a repeatable go-to-market motion that does not rely upon you as the founder to do everything. But once you start to get into 6 figures, especially high 6 figures, certainly 7 figures in terms of revenue, I think you're fair game to buy something.
Awesome. Well, you are such a subject matter expert when it comes to agency M&A. You've been doing it for years. You've been in the trenches. Such a great resource. Thank you, Azim, for coming on the show. I just have one final question for you.
Here we go.
So you've been doing this a while. You're leaning into it. You're obviously working with Herringbone now, doing this really cool strategy. What is your motivation?
Oof. It's a great question, Corey. I think there are two things. So number one, I like the act of M&A. Little known fact, I started life as an M&A lawyer back in Australia because it's something I love to do. I love that sort of act of creating value by combining entities. I quickly realized that being a lawyer in that space didn't necessarily scratch that itch for me. And so long meandering path through business, but I end up doing M&A and, on the business side. And it's just really fun for me. I really enjoy it. Motivation number two, though, more importantly, is I love having these types of conversations. I love helping people recognize that M&A does not need to be this big, scary thing that only the big guys get to do. It's a really, really valid strategy for everyone. And if you're looking to buy, and it's a really, really valid way for you to realize some of the value that you've created if you're on the sell side as well. So just there's such little information out there targeted at the smaller guys. I love working with agency owners specifically to help them realize what options are available to them.
Well, that is clear through all of the great wisdom you've been sharing with us today. And it's been great. I've learned a lot. I've taken a ton of notes. I'm sure the audience has as well. Where can people find out more about you, get in touch? You or Herringbone?
Best place is LinkedIn. Got a sort of strong presence out there. And I tend to post articles related to agency M&A at least a couple of times a week. So even if there's nothing that necessarily even if there's something you don't necessarily want to reach out about right now, I'd love for you to sort of follow along on LinkedIn, because I'm sure there's going to be a point in time when something does come up or you do learn something. And I love talking about this stuff. So feel free to reach out whenever, wherever.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate the opportunity. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Deep Specialization Podcast. If you haven't checked out my best-selling book, Anyone, Not Everyone, you can download the audiobook for free right now by going to anyoneNotEveryone.com. That's anyoneNotEveryone.com. And finally, a special thank you to our sponsor, E2M. We'll see you in the next episode.